I will get us started. And we have the 5 of us talking about our individual research projects planned for this summer. And there'll be time for some general information about the program, and we'll go with that. So I will tell you first about mine. I'm the analytical chemist in the department, and so my projects are largely analytical projects. And those projects range from electrochemical studies, which is my main focus of research on, and we'll talk more about that in a second, on modified carbon electrodes. I also like to investigate extraction techniques to look for contaminants in water. And then we've got some newer instruments in the department. One that just was installed last week that I would like to get a student helping me to learn a little bit better this summer. For your information, a couple of students still on campus who've worked for me in the past are Maya Wolf and Rachel Kaiser, and so they would be good people to talk to about what it's like to work in the Klein Research Lab. And then certainly come talk to me later if you're interested in any of these projects, and we get more specifics. And that's going to be the theme. I think you'll hear from other faculty as well. We like to talk to you here, and then we'd like to speak one-on-one to you about why you might be interested in the projects. An area of research we've been developing over the last decade or so is to take a glassy carbon electrode, which is just a sort of a graphite electrode, and grind that in some reagents. And what's cool about this reaction is it's really easy organic chemistry. I'm not an organic chemist, so I like easy stuff when it comes to synthesis. And so this amine, if you take an organic chemistry, will react to form a diazonium group. And that's a very reactive group because you can imagine the nitrogen likes to pop off as nitrogen gas. And that leaves behind a reactive portion of the molecule that can perhaps stick to the electrode surface. And so we modify electrodes to see if they can become useful sensors for other things later. And one of the interesting molecules we've tried to modify with recently is called hydroxyquinoline. Looks like this. And when you attach it, this is our glassy carbon electrode, when you attach it to the carbon surface, you have this group. Those of you who've taken organic or gen chem know that oxygen might have a lone pair and nitrogen has a lone pair here. And those two lone pairs or so can be attractive to metal ions. And so Rachel Kaiser did an experiment. This is a typical type of a plot we get from the electrochemistry. And mostly just notice that the red is our control. It's an unmodified electrode exposed to copper ions. And when we modify it, we get this green trace without copper exposure. And with blue, we get this little blip here that suggests the copper was attracted to the electrode surface, and we can see an enhanced signal for it. And so we're interested in saying, what other metals work in this way? What's the lowest concentration of those metals we might be able to detect with our modified electrodes? And then what are contaminants? The idea is just kind of a two-step thing. You're going to extract your analytes from the water, and then you're going to analyze them with some technique like chromatography or spectroscopy, depending upon what we're doing. An example of that Maya worked with a little bit this past summer was to take something called nitroxylene and modify carbon particles with it in a little tube. And when you flush zinc-containing solution through that tube, you can trap the zinc in the carbon because it likes to bind to this nitroxylene, kind of a similar fashion to our modified electrodes. And then we can rinse out the zinc with some strong acid solution. And so essentially what we do is we trap the zinc, we rinse away other interfering species, and we pre-concentrate it by flushing a smaller amount of acid through compared to the amount of water that went through with the zinc. And now we can see a signal from the zinc using spectroscopy methods. So again, we're interested in various metals to see which ones might work in the same way. And then the new instrumentation, we have the gas chromatograph mass spectrometer, brand new, sitting on the bench across the hall. And so that will be really cool to learn more about this summer. We inherited something called an ion chromatograph from the geology department. It's an older instrument, but it's new to us. And so I would like some help on learning what we could do with that instrument to be able to use it in different classes. So for me, to be qualified to work in my lab, it's helpful, but not required that you've completed the first semester of organic, because maybe some organic synthesis is involved, and analytical is helpful before the summer. I've worked with students who haven't had these courses in the past, so don't let that keep you from talking to me about the projects. Certainly need to be interested in them. And if you've taken any analytical courses, you'll know that it involves lots of repetition. Yes, Jimmy? Okay. And it's just useful to have a flexible summer schedule so that our 10 weeks, which is a typical length of time for research, overlaps well. That's it.
Not an analytical chemist, though I do sometimes enjoy repetitive tasks. So in the past, the 2 years, I have been working on chemical education and forensics chemistry research. I've had, you may know, our past graduate, Abby Zena. She worked with me on an inorganic chemistry project. But you might see Laura, Amanda, or Sakib on campus. They've worked with me on my chemical education and forensic chemistry project. So who's seen CSI? NCIS? NCIS Las Vegas? Okay. Some people have opinions about that. So forensics chemists take in a lot of odd samples, and they have to perform a lot of techniques, various techniques, in order to determine what's going on, what a suspect may have touched, interacted with, or caused a contamination on those samples. But we never really hear about this in general chemistry. So my goal is to build a general chemistry capstone experiment using the skills that you developed in Gen Chem 1 and Gen Chem 2 in order to provide a forensics chemistry experiment. So I'm looking for a recent Chem 162 graduate or someone who remembers all of, at least a majority of what we learned in 162. So basically anyone past Gen Chem can find a place for you. Someone who's an independent worker who's willing to maybe try some of these experiments or modify what's been done in the past, and someone who likes to think outside of the box. Sometimes when you're developing new experiments, you might hit a stumbling block. So what does this capstone entail? Well, it's chemical education, so first we have to think about how to prepare the student to perform this experiment. So in the past, we worked on a choose your own adventure style pre-lab. So who's read those choose your own adventure books where it says, okay, we've got a fan over here. So essentially it's like you read a page and then you make a choice whether or not you read chapter 2 next or chapter 4 next, and you create your own story. So by allowing students, instead of doing a typical pre-lab that you may have experienced in Gen Chem, to choose which sections to prepare different topics, like maybe the calculation, by doing a choose your own adventure, we reinforce the skills that they would need in order to, in order to best handle the evidence that they are supplied in this capstone experiment. So we help them develop the skills in Gen Chem, both knowledge and the tasks in lab. Then the actual capstone experiment, which is what anyone working with me this summer might be working on, it's going to help create multi-person experiments where teamwork, data collection, and interpretation of that data are going to be really important. So someone who's comfortable taking detailed notes and someone who's comfortable looking at the failures of their experiments just as deeply as the successes of your experiment. So we need to know every aspect of what's going on with these different experiments. So the goal is, at the end of this capstone, the team would create a scientific report that allows them to draw conclusions about the suspect who has interacted with those samples. We're looking at creating experiments that allow students to detect fingerprints, to identify narcotics in fake urine. Last summer, we spent a lot of time figuring out how to make the perfect fake urine. There's still some fine tuning. We're also looking at, no, we're not going to use real.
The reason we're making it.
But we also look at experiments that in the student's evidence bag might come from a chemical contamination of a waterway. So we're looking at developing, especially this summer, an experiment that would allow the students to deal with a chemical spill. We're also looking at detecting blood on a cloth sample, whereas we have an experiment already that detects blood on a paper sample. So what we're really looking at is developing a wide variety of experiments that allow for fine-tuning of established standard operating procedures, as well as creating new things for students to have in their evidence bag during this capstone experiment. So what you would be doing, if you choose to accept or apply to my research group, is developing procedures that students would follow to ensure that they have the best opportunity to take whatever evidence is given to them and be able to draw a conclusion about their suspect. Now that's one of my projects. My other project, which no one has been brave enough to join, so looking at you guys, you're brave enough, is a computational inorganic project. The question is, what makes sapphires blue, pink, yellow, purple, orange, while rubies are red? So this being a computational project, I would be interested in someone who enjoys working on the computer and wouldn't necessarily get bored by spending a couple hours in front of a computer at a time. Using Vienna ab initio simulation package, we'd be looking at one chemical structure, specifically corundum. So what corundum, when you find it pure in the ground, is colorless and clear. When the element chromium, looking at number 24 over there, when it starts sneaking in, it disrupts all those atoms and we get ruby. So we go with just a few little chromium atoms and clear becomes red. When iron, vanadium, titanium, or manganese sneak in, we get the entire party color of sapphires. So what I'd like to do, if you're willing to join me, is to look at exactly which positions we can shove other atoms in, model it computationally, and predict what colors of sapphires we would get. Now, if you like working at computers, this is going to be a ground floor project. It might be a lot of bashing our heads into the wall together until we get it right, but it's going to be interesting. So I'm looking for someone freshman to junior level who enjoys finding details, someone who's willing to work at a computer for an extended period of time and is excited to start something that has never been done before. And it kind of also helps if you can think about a cube in your brain and then look at it from a different perspective, but I can teach you how to do that. Okay, so my summer plans, as you're going to hear quite a bit, include the BCCE, Biennial Conference on Chemical Education. That's taking place the last week of July through August, and anyone working with me, if we get an abstract in on time, which is fast approaching, you'd have the opportunity to attend and present a poster. All of our projects, as again, you're going to hear this quite a bit, are 10 weeks, and due to the flexibility with your schedule, I'm willing to start as early as the 23rd of May, but mostly we're going to see starting research times in June. All right, I just talked a lot. So, have any questions before I hand this off to Dr. Marous?
So I'm Daniel Marous. I teach organic occasionally, biochem here, so I've had a few people in the room. My email's down here if you want to talk more about summer research. My background in grad school and my postdoc at least was in naturally occurring antibiotics. So these are things that living organisms make. And we will be looking at several of these in different research projects. And a secondary thing that's involved with this is combating bacterial resistance. And so bacteria get resistant to antibiotics, and this is a problem clinically because then you have infections that don't go away.
All right, so I'm Justin Hasnack. I'm the organic professor here, and really all the research projects I'm going to describe for this summer involve figuring out ways to help students learn organic chemistry better. Right? That's where I've put a lot of my professional activity lately. And there's three main areas. One is I run these faculty development workshops. I've done some things in my class this year to try to improve metacognitive development. And I have an ongoing project looking at how textbooks have addressed nucleophilic aromatic substitution. And so those are the three main projects. For all of these, I see there would be excellent projects to present your research at the BCCE that a number of other people have mentioned. That's the beginning of August. I will mention this again at the end of my little section here, but and I think Dr. Leland already mentioned it, the abstracts for this are due February 28th. And so if you're interested in doing any of these projects with me, please talk to me sooner rather than later, because the only way to get your name, well, the only way the things are going to happen is if there's a student to do it, because I can't present it myself. I've got too many other responsibilities at the conference. So it would be a student presenting it, and we need to get your name on it, right? So that means talk to me sooner rather than later if you're interested in any of these projects. So first of all, I run these workshops over the summer. This coming summer, it's, what is that, middle of June. I guess that's the second week of June. We've got a conference running at North Dakota State University. We bring in faculty from around the country and introduce them to evidence-based practices for teaching organic chemistry. The goal is to improve their knowledge of these methods, to help them recognize their effectiveness, get practice using them, and then ultimately to go back to their universities and use them, in their classes going forward. And so the purpose of this first project is to try to measure those things. We've got several different tools that you can see up here that we're using to try to measure those. The workshop ran last summer, and so the first part of this project would be collecting year 2 data from last year's participants, seeing we have data about the growth that occurred during the work from the beginning to the end of the workshop last summer. We want to see where they're at a year later. And so there's analyzing some of that data, as well as collecting first year data for this year's participants. And so, and kind of what we have a framework for this research where the hypothesis is that participants' attitude, what they perceive to be the norms of the discipline in their department, as well as how much control they feel that they have over their own instructional environment, will feed into whether or not they intend to actually make changes in their teaching, which will then affect whether or not they actually do make changes. And so that's what we're trying to measure. And so that's that project. The next project, those of you back row of the class that have me for organic this year, one of the new things that I've done this year is I've used specifications grading. You're allowed to retake quizzes. In order to retake those quizzes, this year I'm requiring you to do a little bit of a reflection on that. And there's good reason to believe that having you do these reflections is going to improve metacognition. And so that's a desirable thing, because by improving students' metacognition, that should improve their learning, their performance in that particular course, as well as their performance in future courses, future professional activities. And so we want to look at, has this actually worked? Have students' metacognition improved? Has student performance improved over the course of the semester using this quiz reflections? And so again, the project here is to look at that. Have students passed quizzes more quickly than they have in past years? Do they do better on the final exam, having done these reflections? And so that's the second project, is looking at that. Again, a fair amount of statistics there looking at it, but also just thinking about learning. Let's say for both of these projects, one of the things that you would need to do is go through training for the Institutional Research Board, which is anytime you are doing research that involves human subjects. This is training that you need to do, and it's very helpful to have that training when you're thinking about future research projects that might involve humans, as well as, it's just something good to be able to say, that you have this training as you go into the future things. So that is useful. This last project does not require IRB training because you're just looking at old textbooks. So this is going back. I couldn't find any books, shockingly, from the mid-19th century. It actually looks like it was more like the beginning of the 20th century that I've been able to find textbooks for. But basically what we've done over the last several years, you can see Barbara and more recently Amanda have worked on this project. But as we're looking at how organic textbooks have treated this topic of nucleophilic aromatic substitution and how that's changed as our understanding of the chemistry has changed, as printing technology has changed, things like that. And so one thing those of you, again, in the back row might be disappointed by is this year we're not going to talk about nucleophilic aromatic substitution in 302. The semester got shortened by a week, and so even though it is in our textbook, it got jettisoned from the curriculum because we just didn't have, there's not time to do that, as well as everything else. And if you do this research project, you'll probably get a sense of why, if I had to ditch something, why that was the choice. Also, you could imagine other things that we could look at in textbooks that would be interesting to you. And so I would certainly also be open to starting a new project looking at some other aspect of textbook design and topics. So generally speaking, if you're doing work with me, you're going to be presenting at VCCE. And so that would be your 10th week of research, would be that first week of August. I could start, pretty much anytime in May, probably, but more right after Memorial Day makes sense in terms of a solid 10 weeks. If you wanted to go on some vacation in the middle there, we can make that work too. I don't think it's necessary that you've had organic chemistry or some statistics for these projects, but it probably would help. So if you've got either of those, that would be helpful. And then, as I've already mentioned, these abstracts are due the end of the month. And so if you're interested in doing work with me or with Dr. Eveland or anybody else that would be going to VCCE, talking to us soon would be helpful, right? Our applications for summer research aren't due until after spring break. Dr. Dudek's going to talk about that. But VCCE projects would be helpful to get your name soon.
Hi, Ray Dudek. Well, I do in fact teach PChem. I don't do PChem for research. It's kind of difficult with me. So instead, I've got two projects that are largely analytical chemistry. These are continuations. Much of our projects are continuations previous summer. We get you for 10 weeks, you add to our knowledge, and then we turn it over the next summer. And so the first project is elemental analysis of egg shells and egg contents. And this is a collaboration with Dr. Richard Phillips in biology. A lot of it is we'd find dead birds out in the courtyard, and he's like, I bet you that's got a lot of lead in them. And we would be like, well, we wonder if it does. I didn't want to look at the icky parts of the birds, but I am willing to look at the eggs they lay and the shells and the contents. And so we're going to look at heavy metals within these shells. And we're going to use starling and house wren. These are invasive birds, and actually, when Dr. Phillips or other biologists are out in the field, they have to they take the eggs because we don't want them to spread. And so we have free access to them. I guess you're not allowed to take any old bird egg. And so we want to find if there's a collaboration between metal content nesting locations in Ohio. Do birds that nest on roads, for example, have more heavy metals because they're living near roads than if they're out in the wild? Obviously, the wild eggs are hard to get, so usually I have everybody start with chicken eggs. We can just buy those. You do chicken eggs, you make sure you're doing the procedure well, and then we get these other invasive eggs. And so we continued this. By first, you make these standard samples for different elements. You test the detection limits with these chicken eggs, and then compare the literature value of shell contents. Are we doing what you think should be done? The last couple of summers, we investigated lead and, just on a whim, strontium. Turns out, due to the minerals in this area, there's a huge amount of strontium in a lot of the eggshells for the chickens we test. What's it doing and the impact that it has? No idea. So this would be a continuation from 2020. I didn't do this last summer, and I kind of thought this project was dead and buried. Rachel Burry did it, but I recently went to Marietta, Ohio to review their chemistry department. And while in Marietta, I learned that Marietta is home of the longest running ferromanganese refinery in North America. It is the Ermont Marietta. And apparently there's huge manganese pollution. And for me, it would be fascinating to get eggs that are both upstream and downstream and to see if we notice the effect on what people are eating. So we would have to go to Marietta and find some chicken somehow and get this done. But I think we could work out logistics. It would be fascinating to see a lot of it, the calcium in eggshells get replaced by these other ions. And we look at both, like I said, the shells and the contents. Kind of neat. I think this would be an interesting project. That would be project one. Project two, again, I'm doing more analytical chemistry for biologists, helping them out. Trees make this weird compound called oleuropein or something like that. I call it oleuropein, call it what you want. If you want to call it OP, we started just calling it OP. So OP levels in fringe trees, this is a tree that's native to the area. Essentially, it is related to the ash tree, and if you've heard of the emerald ash borer, it killed all the ash trees in the area. It's starting to kill fringe trees, but fringe trees make this compound, this OP compound. So could we test the amount of OP in these trees, and then also test it related to if they've been damaged? And so you literally could go out with a hole puncher, punch a hole in a leaf, and then we could go back and sample, and is this tree making more OP as a result of that? The problem is in order to get a standardized sample of this, we order it from France. It costs around $200 for like 1/10 of a gram, and that's kind of expensive. And so what we thought of doing last summer, I had a student work on extracting this from a nutritional supplement. I guess people take oleuropein supplements or like olive pills, and apparently it makes, I don't know, their coat shiny. But we thought if we could get this really cheaply, it costs like $14 a bottle, we're not paying $200. Unfortunately, it's pretty hard to extract, and we're also aware that nutritional supplements may not have any of the active ingredients you want, so maybe this is a fool's errand. But we're going to try again this summer, and we're collaborating with a research group at Wright State. Friend of mine in Yellow Springs named Don Cipollini, he's doing all this work. We helped one of his students get their master's thesis with some of our work that we did previously. As far as the work itself, when you're looking at the tree stuff, you take the leaves and the stems, you grind it up, you let it react for 4 hours. We then filter it, run through an HPLC, and then we compare peaks of the HPLC to a calibration curve. In Gen Chem this week, you guys did calibration curves. You kind of have a sense. You take known samples and then compare your own. It is fairly straightforward, and admittedly, a lot of this work would be you having 2 semesters of Gen Chem. I think that's just about everyone in this room, so that shouldn't be an issue. But a lot of it, you're good at lab work and you're good at quantitative work. You like numbers, you like math. This is analytical chemistry, just in a different disguise. You're able to work independently. A lot of these projects are, I would think, easy enough that you can be in the lab, you're getting out what you put into it. And so if you're interested, like, hey, I'm motivated and I want to do this, this would be good for you. And yeah, it is kind of repetitive. You're doing a lot of the same things over and over. But hopefully that's still fine. You know, you get good at it. And certainly if you have only had general chemistry, you do these kind of research tasks. When you take organic or analytical, you'll be a rock star in the lab. So with all of this, we've seen, or you've heard our research, you have our emails, although really you're just going to track us down our offices and find us. Sort of what's the next step? So over the next few weeks, the applications themselves, and we have copies of it in the back, is due March 16th. And you could grab those, although you're better off finding it online. You have to submit it via Handshake. And what you're going to do is first talk to us and say, hey, I'm interested in your project. Like, and if you have a specific, like I'm interested in doing the electrochemistry project, and this is what I found fascinating. Fine. And we'll talk about your background and why you think you're well suited. Hopefully you'll be like, yeah, I've been in house next class. They can vouch for me and say, you know, I'm a good student. And then we're going to take a look at all these applications, and you know, hopefully if we each have 2 students and there's 5 of us, I think you can calculate there's 10 students. And it looks like there's more than 10 in the room, so hopefully, you know, we'll try to get everybody going home happy, but that may or may not happen. Certainly, we will usually give, you know, priority to juniors and then sophomores and our first-year students. But we usually get a couple of first-year students every summer, so don't, you know, a good way of not to get one is don't apply, then you're sure not to get one. So we invite you to apply. You're living on campus for 10 weeks. We pay you about $4,500. We cover your housing, or we plan to, that's brand new this summer. We're not going to cover your food, but ramen's like 25 cents a bag. You're going to be fine. And we have enough students here. Like if there's 10, maybe 12 of you working, that means we have enough students to have various social activities. We're going to have a high tea at 3 o'clock and discuss the various topics of the day. We're going to have pizza lunch on Friday, where we'll talk about not only some scientific stuff, like how to make a poster, how to do an interview, but we're also going to have you guys present your research to the rest of the group here. So it is a nice community. We appreciate that. As far as you're working here for 10 weeks, it is kind of a 40-hour job. We expect you to be here. But again, we're not necessarily having a time clock and you stamping in this and that. It does not have to be consecutive. If you're going home for a summer vacation, talk to the person that you're thinking of working with and saying, hey, I need to be gone, you know, July 4th week. And we can try to arrange that. Hopefully, I know I've gone through a lot of information, a lot of the background, but that's going to be more the nuts and bolts. But with all of this chemistry research, it's going to look great on your resume, but we're hoping you're doing it because you're excited about chemistry, you want to learn more about it, and you want to see what research is like and do it in the lab. And you're good at sort of doing on your own, and you know, it's thrilling. Our success depends completely on you. I'm going to talk a little bit, just very briefly, about other research opportunities. Often we found what works for our students, right? If you do research with us, let's say your first year or second year at Wittenberg, and then you are highly skilled and qualified, and other large schools and industries want you, and then like come your junior year, you go work at some other place. And so one place you can look at is called Croda. That is a chemical firm in Delaware. They do all sorts of consumer and industrial projects. We have an alumni who is there. They sent us an internship at a company called Clariant last summer, but they've now switched companies, and so we're switching internships. We'll get you the application info. It's a good job. It's a good opportunity. If you know, like when you leave Wittenberg, you want to work in the chemical industry, unless like say med school, this would be great for you. You'd get a sense as to what is it like to actually be in the chemistry industry, earn scads of money, and live in sunny Delaware. So yeah, this is going to be coming up. We will certainly post more info. If you're interested in this, contact Dr. Hausneck, but we will keep you updated. And we're really hoping that someone is interested, right? We've got this opportunity, we want to fill it. If it goes unfilled, maybe we don't get it next year. So yes, be interested. Go to New Jersey, go to Delaware, get money.
It's not Delaware, Ohio, it's Delaware, the state.
Yeah, oh, I keep forgetting there's these other Delawares and Londons and stuff. The next thing,
I would add, wait, I was gonna add something. Oh, I mean, Croda's big time in chemical manufacturing. I mean, they're like an international corporation. And I know for me, I did my internship after my freshman year was in industry. It was an absolutely fantastic experience. And I earned good money, and I realized that's not what I wanted to do with my life. I wasn't really sure ahead of time. I thought I probably wanted to teach, but man, money sounded good in industry. And it was a great experience, but I realized it's not what I wanted to do with my life. I think we've had other students that have done internships. I can think of, Clarion internship, one of our students that went there, like, had no idea that she was interested in doing, industry until she did that. And she's like, wow, this is actually pretty decent. And, kind of changed her career and going in that direction. So I do highly encourage, and both the Cronin internship and these other things that to do that Chris talking about.
Certainly with industry internships, it's not something we do here. You're not going to get much exposure to it. And so we're excited to have these opportunities. Same with working at a government lab. You could work at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. You apply through this SOCHE, Southwestern Ohio Council for Higher Education. If you're interested in this, you apply through them. You can get an internship at the Air Force Base, and now you're working at a sort of big-time government lab. We've had students do that in the past. And what's the nice thing with that, let's say you want to work during the school year, they can try to do that. If you've got free time in the semester, they'll pay you to work during the school year. You want to go to Wright State for graduate school and still get a degree through these people? Yeah, you can do that as well. They'll take you, if you are a good worker and they like what you're doing, they will keep you as long as you want them to. And so that is another excellent opportunity. Other ones, REU programs. These are called research experiences for undergraduates. As far as what they are, they're funded by the NSF, National Science Foundations, and they really are for you. They're for students at small colleges to work at large schools. You want to work at some place like a University of Michigan, OSU, Columbia, this is what they are designed for. 10 weeks, although it may be virtual these days. We had a student do one virtually a couple of years ago, but now they're more and more in the lab. I think that's a bit more interesting. And yeah, you get paid probably similar to what we have, if not more, actually. And they'll include housing and or travel and even conference money. There are all sorts of benefits. Each program has different ones. I'm not going to be able to tell you all of them. So as far as where to find them, if you just Google NSF REU, you'll find a huge listing of them. You don't have to do it now, Justin. And you click on the REU information for students. And I will say they're not just chemistry. There can be microbiology, biochemistry, geology, environmental science. We're hoping you're here because you're interested in chemistry, but maybe you're just interested in research. You can find it in different fields. So you don't have to click chemistry, I guess. And it looks something like that. There's all your research areas, and you'll scroll down. There'll be tons of sites. I will say applications for those are a little bit sooner. And with those, you need a letter of recommendation. So one of us faculty has to write how you are in the lab and how you are in your coursework. For us, it's a lot easier to write that letter if you've done research with us. If, Lexi's been in my lab for a while and I could say, oh yeah, she works great and independent, they'll want that. Otherwise, I'm kind of just guessing how well they titrate and gender. So how to get it, obviously, find the information and apply. A lot of you may be thinking, oh, as a first year student, I'm never going to get it. Yeah, not applying is a good way to make sure you don't get it. So if you apply, you might have a chance. But do know those deadlines are coming up soon and you need letters of recommendation, a resume, CV. Have whoever's writing your letter of recommendation look at that CV and resume, that we can give you feedback, maybe increase your possibility of getting these, maybe a cover letter. Like I said, most likely, more likely juniors and sophomores than first years, but it doesn't have to apply, and it's sort of a good